the things that are happening now, I mean, there are so many, of course, but the drumbeat that we're hearing louder and louder is that the old guard from the Democrats has to be replaced. Chuck Schumer really showed little or no resistance with his explanation for why he was supporting this Republican CR. I wonder if you can speak to a what you would do. I mean, what you would have counseled for Schumer, and also b the state of the state for the Democratic Party.
Let me take the second part first. The state is not great. I one of the things that I've been telling anyone in the party who will listen, and I was lucky enough to be invited down to the White House after Harris was defeated, right? So it's sort of like, what are we doing? It's a little too late. But I was invited down to the White House in December and met with senior Biden officials and met with the former president himself. And one of the things that I've been saying is, instead of figuring out what sort of candidate you need and taking someone and trying to mold them into something which they're not, which I think is part of the problem of what happened with Kamala Harris, where the first couple of weeks of her campaign were pretty good. And then it all became the same speech 4 times a day, and it just became something different. You need to find the candidate that is what would actually be useful to the party and what would be appealing, because it really, in the same way that I don't do the contrived positions on my show, I think voters know when you are trying to be someone you really aren't. And the thing about Trump is, for better or for worse, I would argue for the worse, he seems to kind of genuinely be who he presents as, other than the fact that he lies about all of his political positions. Now, I think that this is like a critical thing. On the one hand, Trump's not anti-abortion. He's been pro-choice for 68 years. Then he ran for president and said, oh, I'm pro-life. All the positions are totally contrived. But the kind of like, I'll just say what comes to mind, I'll repeat what someone told me 5 minutes ago, it's Trump, right? So the point I'm making is, by the time the consultants got to Harris and tried to turn her into what they believed was the best Democratic candidate, it felt disingenuous. And so that's where I think the Democratic Party needs to start, which is, instead of a laundry list of traits that they want to mold someone into, find the people who have those traits.
Yeah, that's something that I've been crowing about for years now. Is that messaging is just such a big part of politics. I mean, you have to sell. I was saying this last hour. You have to. It's a sales job, and Trump is a tremendous salesman. So he's lying. I mean, he's lying all the time. He's making up figures, and it just so trying to knock down the lies is a full-time job. But his genius is knowing that people aren't knocking down the lies in real time, and he can say whatever he wants. And they go, well, maybe is there a kernel of truth to that? And even if you discount 50% of that, it's still horrible. No, it's completely 100% a lie, what he's saying. But to your point, and to the point I've been making over and over, I think that, they do need to find people in the party who can message. And I was saying before to somebody who's involved in counseling the Democratic Party in this way, that they really do need workshops in how to communicate. I mean, when you're left with a handful of people like Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg and Jasmine Crockett to be able, and AOC, of course, that's not enough. I mean, it seems to me the right wing really knows how to get on and spit fire.
They do, and there was this Media Matters report over the weekend about the relative sizes of the sort of follower counts of left versus right wing online shows, and the right is just absolutely crushing us, and it's one of the things I think that they've done best. And I hate to say it, part of it is they understand you've got to put money into this stuff. We don't have a Daily Wire on the left. We don't have a lot of these individual funders who are just dumping money in and saying, just grow. Even if you're just spending it on Facebook ads to just buy the biggest audience you can, which then you now have a bully pulpit. We just really don't have it. And so that's a big part of it. The other thing, as far as the candidates go, is, compare for a second Trump showing up and hanging out for 3 hours with Rogan, for however long he did it with Lex Friedman, the Nelk boys, all of these. And he says wacky stuff. I mean, wacky stuff, but it's relaxed. It seems like you'd like to be in that room. Contrast it with, after all of the negotiations, a set is built for Alex Cooper. It's not even her set. It's like a contrived set just to interview Kamala Harris. You know, extreme restrictions were placed in terms of duration. It feels tense. It doesn't create an environment where you say, this is a group I want to be a part of. And this is a big failing.
Yeah, and it's funny. I was saying at the time, I don't know what the Democrats are afraid of. Go on Joe Rogan. Go on Joe Rogan. You'll have 4 tough questions, all of which you should have answers. You want to be president? I don't think I'll have any issue at all. Make the questions as tough as you want. Like, when did you know Joe Biden? Wasn't all there, or whatever it might be. Let them drill down on it. You'll have 4 of those moments, and the rest of it, as you've said, will be just a hangout. And all of a sudden, people will get to feel like, "Wow, that was cool. She's all right." It's a fear that I think comes out of wanting some sort of manicured, choreographed moment that the Democrats really work toward. And I think what you've got in Trump, though, is a generational political figure, don't you think, David? I mean, he's
Absolutely.
able to handle anything.
Yeah, and now the concern is it going to go to the next generation? Because, people are talking about, what about Don Jr. in 2028, either alongside JD Vance or, this is, I wouldn't laugh off any of this stuff.
No, not at all. Okay, one other question about what's going on, and then I'll get to the book. And you didn't, by the way, just for the record, you didn't ask to pitch the book. I just am intrigued by the book, so I want to ask you about it. The other stuff that's happening involved what we were speaking about before you joined us, and that was the way in which increasingly the courts are something of a speed bump for the Trump administration, but increasingly it looks also as though they may be ignored. Can you speak to that?
Well, one of the things from term number 1 was we learned a lot of the checks and balances that were put in place really did not account for the possibility of someone like a Trump. They're just not, they don't have the teeth that they really need in order to truly be checks and balances. And one of the things we were talking about today on my program with my producer was this decree that the Venezuelan gang members should not be sent to El Salvador. And the flights were on the way. A court said, you got to turn the flights around. You can't do it. And it was just ignored. And so we are again up against this question of what exactly can the court do? I mean, are they going to say, we're going to, arrest the pilots? They're obviously not going to do anything to Trump. What exactly is it that can be done? Will they repatriate the deportees because they believe that the deportations were done incorrectly? I don't know that they're going to do any of it. I think it's been ignored. The court directive has been ignored, and they're going to get away with it. And so it's just another reminder of, yes, to think back to Plato, the problem with democracy is some of the most ignorant people end up making decisions, and we got Trump. So that's a problem, right? The voters are a problem, but you don't want to just blame the voters. We also have the situation where we're realizing the checks and balances aren't nearly robust enough, not even close.
The other thing about that Venezuelan situation is I think that it plays in politics of the moment. Like, you see, libs, of course, you're pulling this crap with Trump, and he's trying to get rid of dangerous people. And so he's put them on planes, and he's actually done something. You guys talk about it, and you talk about American security, but he actually does something. I think he wins the cycle with that.
There's a degree to which he does. And of course, when you dig into the details, Trump is using totally novel interpretation of what it means to be at war, right? I mean, even the legal framework for these immediate deportations was never used without a formal declaration of war. It's all seemingly extrajudicial. But again, it's like, unless someone's really going to impose some kind of limit, why wouldn't he just keep going? Because he's gotten away with essentially everything.
Just in that area, I'll ask you, is it your sense, and then I'm going to double back to a question that I asked you before and you didn't quite answer it. The free and fair election thing, David, I worry about it, whether or not, I was saying before that, there are elections in Russia, there are opposition parties in Hungary. I mean, there is the artifice of a free election, and we could have that easily here and not actually have an outcome that isn't predetermined. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, as far as 2024 goes, I believe Trump won. Like I just think Trump genuinely won. And I know that there are people who write to me and say, "No, you got to look at Greg Palast." And I've done an analysis of that. I'm willing to be swayed, but I'm not seeing any of the underlying data that really proves the assertions that he's making. Willing to
You
have my mind changed, but
you didn't think that the disenfranchisement of voters was reached a threshold that might have actually influenced the outcome?
that when I analyze the data that Greg presents, there's a lot of extrapolation that I
Yes.
found to be not done to my satisfaction.
Okay.
Maybe I'm just wrong about it, right? But I genuinely think Trump won in 2024. Could a future election could the process be subjugated such that we have a predetermined outcome? At this point, how could I say, no, that could never happen? I don't know right now what is exactly the mechanism that would be at play. I hope it would never get to that point. I just think it's important to be really careful when we start making these sorts of accusations. We want to make sure that we're not just doing what they did. And when they did it in 2020, it was extraordinarily spurious. So as soon as I have what I think is incontrovertible data, I will report it. So I don't know if that's a direct answer to your question.
No, it is. I thought that's a fair answer, actually, and it accounts for the situation that kind of informs the future, which is what happened this past time. Now, last thing about the Chuck Schumer thing. So you didn't, though, tell me, do you think, what would you have done there? That's a tough spot, wouldn't you agree, David? That's
It's a
very
tough spot.
spot.
And I spoke with a couple of members of Congress and senators about this. And, one of the problems is no matter what happens, when there's a government shutdown, Republicans will try to blame Democrats. Either Democrats did it or Democrats forced our hand or we had to do it because there was all of this stuff. I do think that there was a risk to Democrats of being the party for years and years that says you always keep government open, and then all of a sudden saying, well, in this case, we don't, and all of the reasons we previously said you need to keep it open aren't valid. So I thought there was a problem with that. However, I'm not a political strategist, but if I was dropped into the situation, I would have likely said, eventually we do have to keep government open, but can we push harder so that we get something that is of value that we can take back to voters and say, listen, ultimately they have the cards. Here's how people would have been hurt if the government did close, but here's this thing that we got. And I just don't think we got that.
Yeah, I mean, clearly not. Now, tell me about the new book, The Echo Machine, How Right-Wing Extremism Created a Post-Truth America. Such a great title. Once again, the Pakman titles are so strong.
Well, listen, I try to really do three things in this book. Number one is explain to folks how we got to where we are right now. And it really didn't start with Trump or MAGA. That's the end point. It really started probably in the end of the 50s with the beginning of the civil rights era, resentment against integration and the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That's where the story kind of starts. And then there's a series of stops on the way, including Reagan, including Clinton, Newt Gingrich taking over as Speaker of the House, Bush, Obama, Trump. And ultimately, Trumpism is kind of the landing point. And so that's one story I tell to understand how we got to where we are. The second part of the book is understanding that a lot of this is built on a lack of media literacy, critical thinking, and just sort of like basic epistemology skills to a degree as a deliberate action of right-wing school boards and Republicans in red states to eliminate a lot of the curricula that would better prepare people not to fall for a lot of this stuff. So that's like part two of the story. And then part three is just that there are examples of countries that have figured out a lot of these things, and they're not socialist countries. They have capitalism, they have market economies, but they've figured out how to prevent some of the worst of what we have here, whether it's with education, healthcare, or otherwise. And so I tell those progressive success stories in the book as well.
That's terrific. Really great. How long were you working on it? It's not easy to write a book.
The writing itself took 4 months, which is relatively short, but it took over a year to finally get a proposal that my literary agent and I liked, and it took 3 more months to get a publisher to say, we like it, go ahead and write it. And then from when you turn it in until when it publishes, that's another 8 months. Like, I'm used to, I have an idea and within 2 weeks it's executed,
Sure.
So this was like a real experiment in patience. But so in total, we're talking about a couple of years.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. I mean, and you probably, you're thinking, well, now I could actually, put in some kind of addendum to the book because of, stuff changes in that 2 years.
This is
you're
a
waiting.
really tough thing, right? Because there are videos I did last week where I would change a couple of things. And to turn the book in and then to see everything that's happened, you feel like you have to rewrite the book. But, I feel very good that it's reflective of where we are right now. And it'll really inform people as to how we got here.
Well, we'll have a link under this video to the book, and we have a pretty good, I know we're not a big show like David Pakman's show, but we have a very good track record in the bump that book sales gets. You're going to be very happy with this, Pakman. I think you're going to be surprised.
I don't doubt it, and there are my orthopedist is now very much in touch with me because I signed 1,300 copies of the book last week, and 200 of them are still available. So if people want a signed copy, they can get them at davidpakman.com/booksmith.
You just sold one here to me. I want a signed copy. Hey, you're from, and then we finish up our last minute, but your personal history intrigues me just enough to ask you about it. You're from, is it Argentina? Is it where you're from originally?
I am indeed.
So, and you moved here when you were just a little kid. I want to say 5 or 6.
I was 5, almost 6 when I moved to the U.S. Yeah.
And so that fascinates me. You still speak Spanish, I hope.
I do, and with my daughter, exclusively Spanish to try to keep it going.
That's really great, man. I love it. Look, I love everything about you. Keep doing what you're doing, and it is a major. We give Kim credit for having initially reached out to you and getting you on the show because we're all such big fans. It's really a cool thing that you stopped through. So, The Echo Machine: How Right-Wing Extremism Created a Post-Truth America. David Pakman's book. There'll be a link underneath this video. All the best, and please come visit again.
Anytime, and keep up the great work, and let's let's figure something out together here on what the next step is.
I'd love it. Let's stay in touch. Thanks, David
Take care.
Pakman, everybody. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us